It was a quiet Sunday morning in 1982. In a courtyard tucked away behind a modest home in Nanjing, Professor Jiang sat silently, waiting for someone important. His silver hair shimmered in the morning light. To the casual observer, he was just a frail scholar with poor eyesight. But those close to him knew better. Jiang wasn't just a professor. He was a master of the ancient art of bone reading. He was born into a wealthy family, and during the chaos of the Sino-Japanese War, he was sent to Chongqing to escape the violence. There, fate introduced him to a mysterious master who passed down to him the skill of reading bones, an ancient mystical art said to reveal one's destiny through touching the person's bones. His reputation spread quickly. Many came to seek his insights, and at first he welcomed all, but over time his vision began to fail. He thought back to his own teacher, also blind in old age, and the master before him was also blind. Jiang began to suspect that their blindness was no mere coincidence, but the price paid for revealing too many secrets of heaven. From then on, he stopped reading people randomly. He agreed to do it only if they were truly extraordinary, and today he was waiting for such a person. At precisely 9 a.m., a beautiful young woman stepped into his courtyard. Her face was striking, but her eyes carried a quiet sorrow. Jiang offered her a chair. Without asking her name or birthday, he began observing her face in complete silence. Then, with her consent, he began touching her bones, from her skull and facial features down to her limbs and joints. When he finished, the room fell still again. He took out a magnifying glass to examine her face and palms very closely. Then, finally, he spoke. "What a shame! If your ears weren't reversed, I wouldn't be talking to you like this now. I'd have to go through layers of protocol just to see you. You would have been China's first lady." The woman blinked, confused. "But my ears look perfectly normal. What do you mean, reversed?" The professor chuckled. "Not upside down. I mean, left and right should have been switched. Had your ears been mirrored, your life would have followed an entirely different path. You would have been an empress." The woman's heart skipped. She showed no expression, but her mind had already begun to churn. Long-buried memories were starting to rise to the surface. It was 1969. Lin Biao, then vice chairman of both the Communist Party and the Central Military Commission, had been named Mao Zedong's successor. His ambitious wife, Ye Qun, decided it was time to find the perfect wife for their only son, Lin Liguo, an Air Force officer and a future leader of China. Ye Qun's standards were unrelenting. No moles, no freckles, no crooked teeth, no sparse or yellowish hair, no rough hands, no awkward posture, and definitely no bad manners. Through a powerful network, her scouts scoured the country. After layers of screening, one name emerged, Zhang Ning, a dancer from a military song and dance troupe. At first, her 24-year-old son Lin Liguo opposed the arranged marriage, but the moment he saw her, he changed his mind. It was love at first sight. Her beauty was undeniable. But Zhang Ning already had a boyfriend and wasn't interested in marrying into the powerful Lin family. But under tremendous pressure, she broke up with her boyfriend. That year, Miss Zhang was just 20 years old. In 1970, Mao began to distance himself from General Lin Biao. He accused Lin of forming factions and harboring ambitions. The writing was on the wall. The once favored Lin family was in danger. They secretly planned to flee China. Lin Liguo wanted to bring his fiancée with him, but his sister, feeling loyal to Mao, secretly exposed her family's escape plan. She even drugged Zhang Ning with sleeping pills to stop her from leaving. On a September night in 1971, Lin Liguo and his parents boarded a plane, while his sister stayed behind. The plane crashed in Mongolia. No one survived. The family was suspected of fleeing to the Soviet Union, and their plane was shot down. Zhang Ning, who had nearly become the daughter-in-law of the second most powerful man in China, was left alone, stunned, and was soon placed under investigation. She attempted suicide but was resuscitated. But sitting in Professor Jiang's courtyard now, hearing his words, it all started to make sense to her. If history hadn't taken that sudden turn, wouldn't she have become China's first lady? You left home young, found your own way, and supported yourself. At a very early age, you enjoyed the status of a junior official. Zhang Ning's eyes narrowed. Zhang Ning interrupted. Wait, how old was I when I left home? Without missing a beat, the professor answered, 10. And another jolt hit her heart. He was right again. Her father had been a decorated general, but he passed away when she was just 8. By the age of 10, she was performing in a military dance troupe, already drawing a salary from the state, indeed equal to a low-ranking official. Then came a revelation that nearly knocked her off her seat. You, the professor said slowly, are extremely gifted. You are not ordinary. At 16, while in a foreign land, you were presented with a tremendous opportunity. Had you seized it, you'd be living in luxury abroad right now. Zhang Ning was now breathless. What happened when she was 16? The year was 1965. Zhang Ning, then a 16-year-old dancer with the Nanjing Military Region's Song and Dance Troupe, was selected to join a cultural delegation to perform in Indonesia and Cambodia. At the time, Indonesia was under the rule of President Sukarno, a towering figure in Asia's post-colonial world. Among the many people Zhang met on that trip, one stood out, the president's son, whom she affectionately called Young Master Su. Zhang Ning's dancing was dazzling. Her grace, beauty, and the way she commanded attention under the spotlight captivated audiences everywhere she went, especially young Master Su. But being the president's son, he couldn't just walk up and express his admiration. So he disguised himself as a low-ranking cultural liaison and started hanging around the Chinese delegation, and always flanked by 2 translators. To keep up the act, he even wore large, wide-framed sunglasses. At first, members of the Chinese delegation found his behavior suspicious and kept their distance, but eventually, his true identity slipped out. In an effort to impress Miss Zhang, he even learned a few Chinese phrases. The tour, which was originally supposed to last a month, was mysteriously extended to 45 days. No one said it outright, but everyone knew why. The president's son didn't want Miss Zhang to leave. And then, on the day the delegation was scheduled to depart, chaos struck. At the airport, just as the group was boarding, a crowd of unusually enthusiastic well-wishers suddenly surged forward, breaking up the formation. 7 or 8 men surrounded Zhang Ning and began ushering her away. Waiting outside was a black limo. A group of men in black stood by, ready to whisk her off. They very nearly succeeded. Just in time, however, the troupe's manager and a few male performers rushed over and pulled her back. The plot was foiled. Young Master Su's kidnapping for love failed. Defeated but still infatuated, Sukarno Jr. handed her a gift at the boarding gate, a silver dagger and a white silk scarf. In stiff, halting Mandarin, he said, "Zhang Ning, please remember me." That incident could have easily turned into a political scandal, given the climate of the time. Everyone who witnessed what happened knew better than to speak of it again. Even during the height of the Cultural Revolution, not a single word of it leaked out. But now, here in this quiet courtyard in Nanjing, a man who had never met her before was describing it in great detail. How could Zhang Ning not be shocked? And yet the revelations weren't over. Professor Jiang leaned back and continued with his reading. Between the ages of 17 and 20, he said, you were surrounded by the three cosmic nobles, the dragon, tiger, and phoenix. Had you seized the moment, you would have soared beyond fame, beyond power. No matter whether the dragon or the tiger prevailed, the phoenix, you, were destined to be First Lady. Zhang Ning froze. She knew who the tiger was. That was Lin Liguo, her fiancé, whose childhood nickname was Little Tiger. She was the phoenix. But the dragon? Who could that be? As it turned out, after the Lin family escape incident, Zhang Ning was placed under investigation and monitored closely. Not long after, she caught the attention of Mao Zedong's nephew, Mao Yuanxing. He was smitten. But Zhang Ning, tired of suffocating politics, had no interest in getting swept up again in pointless political games. So she firmly refused. But refusing power has its price. Without any legal process or formal charges, she was sent off to a labor farm for so-called re-education. Her three brothers at home weren't spared either. They were all dragged down with her. A devastated Zhang Ning felt at the time that her beauty brought her nothing but misfortune. She hated her good looks. But now, hearing all this laid bare by a man she had only just met, Zhang Ning couldn't help but feel a strange sense of fate. It was as if her past, her missed chances, her narrow escapes, had all been carved into her bones. And somehow, Professor Jiang could read every line of it. Her disbelief began to fade. In its place, something unexpected stirred: trust. When the topic turned to marriage, Professor Jiang's tone shifted. Your worst years, he said gently, came around when you were 24 or 25. You fell not just from a height, but into a pit of muck. You were buried in mud, your true self hidden beneath layers of grime. People saw only a stone, but you were jade. Zhang listened silently, eyes lowered. You carry nobility in your bones, he continued. The years of suffering and humiliation will not last forever. One day, someone will walk through that swamp, spot you amid the mud, and recognize the treasure. He will lift you out. That man is your true destined husband. The professor's words opened Zhang's emotional floodgate. At 25, Zhang Ning had returned home to Nanjing after years of political exile. There, a persistent military officer, formerly a bodyguard for a top general, wooed her relentlessly. She married him and gave birth to a son, but the marriage was rocky and joyless. It was this storm of disappointment that finally led her to Professor Jiang's courtyard. And where is the man who could lift her out of the mud? With tears welling in her eyes, she told him softly, But I'm already married. The professor nodded, not surprised. This marriage will end before the year's out. You will marry 3 times in your life. Zhang Ning's head snapped up. 3? The man explained with calm conviction. The first one never happened, but it still counts. The man died before you could marry. It was a union fated but never fulfilled. Her heart skipped. He meant Lin Liguo. The second is the one you are in right now. It will fail and will end this year, 1982. The third, he paused, will come when you are around 38 or 39, 40 at the latest. A man will appear from the southeast. You won't have to chase him. You will be at home, and he will come to your door and propose. That man, he is your destined match. He will see what others missed. With him, you will cross the ocean, start a new life. The clouds will lift, and your true self will shine. The flower hidden in darkness will finally feel the sun. The professor leaned in a little closer and added, but before then, beware. After your divorce, there will be suitors. One of them is dangerous, very dangerous. Guard yourself well. When their session was finally ending, Professor Jiang asked Miss Zhang, "Tell me, was I wrong in anything I said?" Zhang Ning shook her head. "No, nothing." "So then," he smiled, "can you tell me who you are?" When she said her name, Professor Jiang's eyes widened in awe. "No wonder," he murmured. "No wonder your bone pattern is so rare. I was puzzled when I first saw you, but now I understand. I read you right." Then Zhang Ning asked the question that many of us have. "Professor, is this bone reading real science?" The professor didn't blink. It's a science the world hasn't yet come to understand. He gave a simple explanation. If you want to understand a tree, its age, its traumas, you cut it open, count its rings, look at its scars, the bark, the trunk, the grain, all tell you its story. Everything leaves traces. Trees follow nature's rhythm, so do people. His own teacher, the professor said, had spent a lifetime studying bone reading, traveling to India to study skeletal alignment, to Japan to learn how to read skin patterns, and anchoring everything in the Chinese classics like the I Ching or the Book of Changes. It was a lifetime pursuit, fusing bone, spirit, and cosmic flow. He spoke of ancient arts like Gu Shu, a form of destiny reading that was said to be created by Gui Guzi, a legendary sage of the Warring States. It used the structure, shape, and spacing of bones to chart one's life path. Sometimes it was used alone, sometimes in tandem with other forms like character divination. In Professor Jiang's words, the spirit needs a form, just like a mountain needs bedrock to keep from eroding. A person's essence is anchored in their bones. What I read isn't anatomy. It's a small number of bones connected to one's Jing Qi Shen, essence, energy, and spirit. That's where your fate is carved. Zhang Ning left Professor Jiang's home that day in awe. It all seemed too far-fetched, too dramatic, and yet so real and accurate. That was 1982. Indeed, Zhang Ning divorced at the end of the year, just as the professor had predicted. After the divorce, one of her many suitors was relentless and turned vengeful when she rejected him. In an act of cruel revenge, he murdered her son, drowning the boy. Zhang Ning was devastated and spiraled into grief so deep that she went to a monastery. She wanted to become a nun, but the abbot sent her home. In 1989, a Chinese-American businessman in New York named Lin Saipu read about her tragic life. Moved by her story, he reached out. They began writing letters to each other. A correspondence blossomed into something more. Mr. Lin flew to China and proposed. The moment they met, it felt like they had known each other for lifetimes. They married just 2 weeks later. That year, Zhang Ning was 40 years old. And just as Professor Jiang had foretold, in 1990, Ms. Zhang moved to the United States, leaving behind the shadows of her past. Her new life was peaceful, fulfilling. They had a son together. And here, something uncanny happened. The baby looked eerily like Zhang Ning's first son, and what truly shook her was the birthmark. On his left arm was a mole, identical in shape and position to the mole her first son had, the one who was murdered. To Zhang Ning, there was no doubt that the boy had come back to her. All of this is recorded in her memoir, Zhang Ning, Writing My Own Story. And that's the end of the story about a mysterious bone reader and a woman whose life was nearly a fairy tale and nearly a tragedy. But as her story proved, even when buried in mud, jade remains jade. All that's needed is for someone to discover it. Everything is recorded in the bones. That's all for today. If you enjoyed the story, please like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more.